So what's up, man?
Coolin', man.
You know what I want to hear, right?
What you want to hear?
Baby!
Yo, you know what it is? Buffet Boys back in the building. We're at the Cathedral. Your boy Eb, the Salvadoran sensation. And of course, as always, with me is my main man, 100 Grand, the Hotep hustler himself, the best import coming out of Mexico, Mr. Kodak Brown, Mr. 32 Savage, Mr. Uber on deck, Vic. What's poppin', Vic?
Yo, what's going on, Ed? Hey, you got to introduce our host,
and
man.
I'm going to get to that.
Our
and I'm going to get to that.
Our guest, I should say.
And today we have a special guest, someone that I've been waiting to talk to for quite some time. Super excited. We have actor, producer, writer, YouTube sensation. Ask about him. You know, little Tay ain't got nothing on him. Professor and gang expert, Mr. Alex Alonso. How you doing, sir?
Oh, thank you very much for that introduction. But I've retired from acting since I was a teenager.
Check his IMDb page.
Yeah, I guess
Check his IMDb page. I saw it.
Yeah, you was looking at the IMDb. I haven't acted since I was 19, 20 years old.
Jesus. And how old are you, about 32?
Yeah, exactly. But, man, someone else actually introduced me as an actor, and I guess that's a label that's going to follow me forever.
Listen, you got an IMDb page.
I do.
You're in front of the camera all the time, so.
Yeah, but I had a very short acting stint in my late teens, very, very early 20s, and then I realized I want to go to college.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this acting. And I actually was getting some work. I worked with a lot of people who became stars. I worked with Halle Berry on a show once.
What?
When Halle Berry was just doing her thing.
Damn.
And I worked with, I was, what's his name? Ruby Dee's husband. He died. I didn't know the stature of this man when I was working on a show, a Burt Reynolds show, and Ossie Davis is his name, legendary African-American actor, goes back decades, and I was just a 19-year-old dude and working on a show that he was co-starring on, and years later I didn't realize the magnitude of, his skills, his talent, what he did as an advocate for the community. But yeah, my acting career has long been over.
Well, you were born in the Bronx, right?
I was born on 161st Street in the McKinley Projects, right next to the Forest Projects where hip hop started.
Okay.
So I saw it. I saw hip hop unfold because I was at that age. I was there, and I was at that age where I saw the DJing. I saw the graffiti
genesis,
writing,
the
birth of it, the
Wow.
whole thing. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, so you grew up during the late 70s, early 80s?
I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. I was born in 1970s.
That Koch era.
Yeah.
Was coming up.
In fact, when the Sugar Hill Gang came out with that song, Rapper's Delight, in 1979, I was 8 years old, and I used to write the lyrics on a sheet of paper. And we didn't have copy machines back then, so I'd write it over and over and over, and I would sell each sheet for 10 cents.
Oh, really?
At school, yeah. I think I was in the 4th grade, and I actually got in trouble in the elementary school I was going to for commerce. You're not supposed to sell stuff. I was making 10 cents a page. But that's because I was fascinated by hip hop even in 1979, and I was into it before that album came out. I used to listen to Kool Moe Dee and the Treacherous Three. They came out in 1977 when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and but it's the Rapper's Delight and the Sugar Hill Gang that made a name because they're the first ones to do it on wax.
So, during that time, how long were you actually in New York?
I was in New York up until about the early 80s. I moved to Los Angeles, and then I was sort of back and forth because my parents had split. My father had lived in California. My mother and grandmother were still in New York, so I'll go back and forth all the time. So even though I had moved to LA in the early 80s, I had went back in 1984, and 1985 was an amazing hip-hop year because that was Slick Rick, Lottie Dottie, We Like to Party, and that was just an amazing summer, 1985. And I'm so glad I was in New York because I was supposed to be in LA. But I spent the end of 84 and a lot of 85 And for those who were around in '85 in New York when Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh was out, that was one of the most like classic years of hip hop. You know, and it's a year that I'll never forget.
Man. Golden year.
The golden age.
The 80s is the golden age, but I bet you if you did a survey and you asked a lot of hip-hop heads what year had the most magnitude, I would say that a majority of them would say 1985.
85.
Yeah, definitely 85. Even though Run DMC was out 83 and 84, and then, of course, LL came out in 86, 87, and then Rakim came out with that classic album. But 85 is when everyone started to rally around. This is a culture that it's going to be here to stay.
Right.
Yeah.
All our parents started to realize it's not going nowhere.
Yeah.
And all the elements of hip hop was still significant and important. Breakdancing was significant in '85. Graffiti writing, DJing. You know, it's changed so much since then. But '85 for all the hip hop heads, I'm sure it's a year that we'll never forget.
Yeah, I bet. Now with that, right, you got the whole hip hop element, right, and it's all birthed out of poor, disenfranchised youths that want to come out, they want to party. Right, so you have the graffiti, you have the breakdancing, you have the hip hop, the rap, the actual spitting, the DJing, and also, I'm assuming in that environment, right, you have a birth of gang culture, right, to a degree.
I would actually say in New York, the gang culture was already present. In fact, Africa Bambaataa, who was, you know, he has his own issues right now, right?
Yeah.
We won't even go into. But in the 70s, he was a big part of the gang culture before the hip hop culture really took off. And what he did was he took the gang culture and he turned it into a different path. So we had gangs like the Savage Skulls and a bunch of others that I don't remember because I was just too young. I was like 4, 5, 6, 7 years old when all these gangs were active. But I remember by the time you get to 78, 79, 80, all of these gangs are fading out. They're kind of not active anymore, and they're all involved in the hip-hop movement. So I would say the gang culture was already there. I mean, the gang culture goes back to my father's generation in New York. In fact, my uncle, I've said this before, he started a gang in New York, in the Bronx, called the Puerto Rican Tigers that was well known. So this is the 50s, you know, so you have this gang culture in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and then the culture kind of dies out when hip hop blows up. Yeah. And it's not until you get to the mid to late 90s or mid 90s, the New York gang culture comes back, but it comes back with a new identity, Bloods and Crips, which I never thought I would ever see in New York City. Because New York City is its own entity. Yeah. It is its own culture. They were not going to allow outside culture to influence this important city, this huge city, but hey, it happens.
And Bloods and Crips is as LA as you get, right? When it comes to street gangs.
Absolutely. I mean, that is if I was going to do a logo for the city of Los Angeles tourism, you best believe there's going to be some red and blue in it.
So you go from New York, right, and you finally come out to LA. How's that experience? You're coming from, I mean, at least at that time, I'm sure you got a bunch of Puerto Ricans, right? A few sprinkled Dominicans, probably some Colombians, and then you come out to LA. In the late mid 80s? No,
early 80s actually.
Early 80s.
Yeah.
And now you have a completely different culture, right, of Latinos. You have, I'm assuming at that point, a good influx of Mexicans and Mexican culture. So no more pernil, none of that. Now you got tacos. And so how's that experience?
Yeah.
What kind of culture shock is that for you?
Yeah, no more pernil, no more bacalao, no more arroz con gandules. But yeah, I got a taste of Mexican and El Salvadorian culture, which I had never seen before. I went to middle school. I went to the school that was in the center of everything. African Americans, Mexicans, El Salvadorians, Asians, and even whites was at this school. And I'll say it's John Burroughs Middle School.
Okay.
When I was there, it was called John Burroughs Junior High. And that was my introduction. 7th grade, I got to the school, and even African Americans. And I didn't have a lot of contact with African Americans in New York, as you might think, because we lived in segregated areas.
Yeah.
And I lived in the city in a predominantly Puerto Rican community, and then we moved upstate, and it was mostly Italians in the area that I lived upstate. So I didn't really interact with African Americans until I got to Los Angeles. So I was just like, oh wow, brothers. You know, I had one black friend in New York named Zane Miller. But when I got to John Burroughs Middle School in the 7th grade, it's like 500 black dudes, and you know, and I had never seen anything like that before. And they're blooding and cripping.
Okay.
And
so that was your first introduction.
7th grade, John Burroughs Junior High, and I was interested. I was like, wow, who are these dudes? Let me go hang out with these guys during nutrition. Oh, let me see what these dudes are doing for lunch. and the interesting thing about the Latino gang culture back then, it was heavily influenced here in Los Angeles by heavy metal music.
Really?
Metallica, AC/DC, all these, because they would all wear these T-shirts, and they would let their hair grow long, and they'll cut their sleeves off. So it was really a different sort of Latino gang culture, especially with the guys from El Salvador. They were heavy into all of those heavy metal groups in the 80s. Ozzy Osbourne, Sid Vicious. And I'm only saying these names because I remember the T-shirts. I never listened to any of their music. But so that was kind of interesting. And there's a book out by Professor Thomas Ward where he talks about the history of MS, and he mentions that influence, that heavy metal influence. Do you guys know what the sign is for MS, the hand sign?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, the devil.
Oh, wow.
Where's this come from?
Heavy metal.
This is
goat.
I'm throwing up the
Goat.
devil signs.
Yeah,
this comes from the music. This comes
yeah.
from the heavy metal music they're listening to. This day, you see this tattoo on their head.
On their
they put their
chest.
little
Wow.
things on the forehead. This is from all the AC/DC and
Wow.
Metallica they were listening to in the early 80s.
Well, goddamn. All this time, I had no idea.
But today, they get kind of vilified in the media because it's like synonymous with devil worshiping.
Right.
You know, but the guy from Kiss doesn't really get, he doesn't
Get
really.
no flight for that shit.
Nah, he does it all the time. He's one of the,
Hip hop culture does it now. If you watch videos of the new young
Lil
cats,
Wayne
they do it all the time.
Yeah.
Lil Wayne was up to stuff like that too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that are into that. But yeah, that's an interesting history with the heavy metal and the Latino gang culture in the early 80s that a lot of people kind of forgot about.
Yeah.
Okay. So, 7th grade, Bloods and Crips. This is your first introduction to, obviously, the gang culture is completely different than what you saw in New York, right? So,
Absolutely.
that's kind of what spun this love or this passion to kind of figure out.
Was the Colonel.
Yeah, is that what
Colonel.
popped it off for you?
It was. See, a lot of people ask me, like, when did you start studying gangs? And I used to say, when I got to USC, as an undergrad, but really it started in the 7th grade.
Okay.
Even though I wasn't doing it academically and I wasn't applying, social science principles and approaches to it, but that's where it really starts. I'm starting to meet guys, I'm starting to watch them, hang out with them, socialize with them, and do all kind of stuff with them and witness all kind of crazy things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it starts when I was 12 years old.
Okay. And
Well,
so
I think that's like an interesting way to jump into an idea that we were talking about, where LA is getting gentrified rapidly right now, right? And you brought up USC, and I have friends who've gone to USC, and I've gone to visit, and I see it there more than anywhere else. The school itself is buying up the neighborhoods. How does this gentrification affect the gang culture? Because it's got to be splitting territories up. It's got to be,
Well, you're absolutely right. It actually goes both ways. How does gang culture affect gentrification as well as gentrification affects gang culture? Well, the urban developers that come into a neighborhood to do whatever development they want to do, the first thing is they want to know about the neighborhood. And oftentimes people are scared that there are gangs there. Mm-hmm. So when this whole gentrification started, and it really starts a long time ago, it starts under Mayor Tom Bradley, who's long since been gone. He was elected in the 70s, but he had this vision for Los Angeles to build skyscrapers, which didn't exist in the 70s, and to develop the city into a not just a major U.S. city, but an international city. So he kind of laid the blueprint for it, and then the administrations that followed him continued. And one of the things that they implemented in the 80s was the gang injunction. So you have a developer that wants to come to a certain neighborhood and develop, but he's like, hey, there's gangs here and we're not really too comfortable about it. The city says, don't worry about it. We got a gang injunction and we're going to try to displace them, move them, and lessen their impact on the community. So that's one of the first things that starts to happen in the 80s. In 1987, no one was talking about gentrification, but that's the first gang injunction. So that's the plan. That's the beginnings of the plan to gentrify this entire city. And then they went to Venice in 1989 with the Oakwood Plan, which I wish someone would give me a copy of the Oakwood Plan. Can't find a copy, but it was written by the Pacific Division of the LAPD, and it basically says, we're going to get rid of all the blacks and Mexicans in Venice, and these are the ones we're going to get rid of. So they name families, they name names.
Wow.
And if you go to Venice today, it doesn't look nothing like it used to look in the 80s. So this is a plan that started way back under Tom Bradley. It really went forward in the 80s, and now in the 2000s, we are seeing the results of it in a massive way. Yeah. This didn't just happen in like 5 years. Yeah. This is really like decades. A 30-year plan.
Wow. Yeah. And that's funny because I was talking to Vic. I was reading on the LA Times how Compton is apparently becoming a real estate hotbed for people, where they're buying up these homes and they're reselling them, and Inglewood as well is becoming, they're just the influx of money that they're trying to pump in, but trying to kick people out. And it's wild, right? And so from the outside, if someone that doesn't know all of this, you just think like this shit just started like 5-10 years ago, right? You just start like, they just started gentrifying, just like Brooklyn. Yeah. Like I heard Brooklyn at this point is just like nothing what it used to be. Right, but these are all
artists and pickle stores everywhere.
Yeah, but you mentioned Compton. Compton and Watts is considered some of the most valuable land in all of Los Angeles because it's at the junction of the 110 freeway and the 105. Mm-hmm. Now, those are very important expressways because the 110 serves downtown Los Angeles, and the 105 serves what? The airport.
Oh, yeah.
Compton and Watts is right at that junction.
Yeah.
So just imagine what they can do there in terms of high rises, condominiums, and people would say, "Oh yeah, I live right here at the junction of the 105 and the 110." Hotels. Yeah. So that's 50 years from now or 100 years from now, there probably won't be a Compton and Watts. Yeah. It'll be some sort of new urban community with high rises and maybe a bunch of hotels and condominiums and a few mansions.
So Alex, since we're talking about that area, that down by the airport area, I was studying up, watching your videos from the, interviews to your own personal channel. There was a video that kind of came up on the autoplay, and it was a video where you went to, I think it was like a benefit or some kind of release party thing. But you said something very interesting, and this is one of the questions I had to ask. You were talking about how South Central is kind of a social construct that has been made to vilify, people of color, and it's not necessarily, central to LA or South Central to LA. Can you speak a little more on that?
Yeah, I usually say there is no such place as South Central LA.
It's not South or Central.
Nah, the South Central LA label started in the 1940s when African Americans first migrated into LA during World War II. And they lived on Central Avenue, which is considered the East Side. Mm-hmm. And they lived on South Central Avenue. And in the 40s, blacks couldn't live outside of this little ghetto because of restrictive covenants, which they didn't strike down until 1948. So in the early 40s, they're all in this one area called the Central Vernon Corridor on South Central Avenue. Mm-hmm. Now, eventually, blacks were able to move out of that. They were able to move south of Slauson, which they couldn't live before. They were able to move west of the freeway, which they weren't able to live before. And they broke out of that ghetto. But wherever blacks had moved, they called that South Central. So it just became a label of where black people are at in LA. Now, blacks have moved far west now. They're all the way to Crenshaw, La Brea, Fairfax. And people really think all of this is a place called South Central LA. And really what it is just a way to say where black people are at. So city government actually acknowledged this several years ago. City of LA doesn't use South Central anymore.
South LA, right?
It's just South LA. Yeah. And the media, they stopped saying it. So if you look at old news clips, 80s and 90s, they'll say, reporting live from South Central, And, I learned this early on. I learned this in the, 20-something years ago. And people always get mad at me and say, no, man, I'm from South Central. I grew up in South Central. I said, no. I said, where'd you grow up? In the jungles. I said, well, you're from Baldwin Village. The next, where'd you grow up? I grew up in the Nickersons. Okay, you're from Watts, But some people have now this identity. They're connected to this identity because pop culture has popularized this term, South Central. Mm-hmm. I was working on a book. I was consulting on a book for these guys that was writing about this murder that happened in Los Angeles in 1984. And they had to struggle with how do they identify LA? Because I told them, no, don't call it South Central. Mm. They said, but we're writing a story that took place in 84 where everyone called it South Central. I said, it doesn't matter. South Central never existed. So it was their book. They were the authors. And guess what they went with?
South Central.
They went with the South Central because it's popular. And I'm a little guilty of it too. When I post a video and I put tags in, guess what tags I put in sometimes? I put South Central because I know people are looking for that.
Yeah. People connect to that because they know what it is. Unless you're actually in LA, close to it, everyone still considers South Central LA, right? If you talk to people from the Midwest, you talk to people from any other state, and you say South Central, they automatically connect because of the movies. I know that they're trying to kind of get away from it because of the stigma.
Yeah.
Well, it's also because Watts doesn't have the same ring and recognition off of, just the name South Central.
Yeah.
So unless you're in the area, unless you know LA, it's not easy to recognize different neighborhoods. So when they also put that name South Central to it, it's an identification type deal for people that don't understand. But I had not known any of this until
it really has a racist history because it's connected to the real estate practices of blockbusting, steering, and it's also connected to restrictive covenants, which did not allow blacks to purchase property outside of that South Central Avenue neighborhood until you get to the 50s. So this label, it continued on and people use it so freely, but I tell people it has a significant connection to the racist history of Los Angeles, but it's hard to convince people of that.
And so you bringing that up, the influx of African Americans in the 40s or after in the late 40s, early 50s, is that really when the Blood and Crip movement? Because from my understanding, the Bloods and Crips were initially started, to serve the community essentially, right? It isn't what it is now or what we have come to know it. My understanding is the Crips started again as protect our own from racism, from other people, and then the same thing with the Bloods. Is that true?
Yeah, there's a level of truth to that. It was more about like we're going to protect our neighborhood, we're going to protect our people here. But there were some guys in the very first generation that they were a little aggressive and they weren't so proactive with the revolutionary movement because in the 60s, especially after the Watts riots, you had a whole generation of black gangs, pre-Blood Crip, Slausons, the Gladiators, the businessmen, the Romans, the Pueblo players, the Hunters. There's a bunch of them. But by 65 in the Watts riots, they all kind of came together and they got very political and some got revolutionary. So then you have the advent of all these political organizations, including the Black Panthers in LA.
Okay.
So you kind of moved away from the gang culture, and it becomes more about the civil rights movement, the local civil rights movement in LA, led by guys like Bunchy Carter, Ron Karenga, and a bunch of other cats. But then the FBI got involved. They really wanted to stop that movement.
Is that when they try to vilify them to a degree?
They were like the Panthers.
Yeah,
just like the Panthers.
They did
any movement.
In fact, the Panthers in L.A. had more shootouts with the police than any other Panthers in Oakland or New York or Chicago. The L.A. Panthers were the most aggressive.
But that had to do a lot with the hiring practices of LAPD, though, right? Because, as we know, they would bring in people from all across the country that had not so favorable views on people of color in LA.
Basically, you had Southern whites policing Los Angeles that were hired by the chief Parker back then. But then after the Panthers and all these groups were pretty active, FBI got involved, the federal government got involved and really shut them down. And then underneath the Panthers, you had like baby Panthers who were trying to be revolutionary. and they were trying to follow in their footsteps. But by the time all of their leaders got arrested or killed or sent to prison, they kind of morphed into these groups that became gangs. Mm-hmm. So pretty quickly, it goes from like Black Power in 68, 69 mm-hmm. to kill them niggas by 1972. And then 72 was the most violent year. It just really kicked off, and we have not come back since 72. There was the most murders.
That was the peak.
That was I would say it was the beginning, and then it just continues and continues and continues up until now. I would say the last decade we've kind of saw homicides and crime drop, but 72 was the turning point from that civil rights movement, that revolutionary ideology to we gonna kill him. Mm-hmm. We killing him, and it's unfortunate. But the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, COINTELPRO, they played a major part in creating that conflict, and it's been all well documented. Agents of Repression is a great book that outlines it, and there's several other books that pretty much exposed what the FBI was involved in. They were writing cartoons, and they was writing propaganda letters to pit one side against another side. And then the Crips and Bloods were birthed out of that, and pretty quickly it got aggressive.
Wow. And I think we all have, at least for those who may not necessarily be so educated on it, and me included, right? You hear these stories of the government created this, the government did this, right? It's all well documented, but for some people it's just hearsay, right? It's kind of like that conspiracy theory to a degree, but it kind of seems like a lot of these gangs were created in essence by the government to some degree.
You could actually argue that, even though Raymond Washington was out there recruiting his own little homies.
Yeah.
It's the work of the federal government that created that environment where Raymond Washington and others were able to do that. So you could actually argue that the United States government created the Blood and Crip situation that now is worldwide.
Yeah, and that's how you get the. I know you were discussing in New York how you have Bloods and Crips now, but that's directly from L.A. and some of these guys getting locked up, and then they may go to a different state. And I'm assuming that's how that gang culture gets implemented to a degree, right? Because New York didn't know anything about Crips and Bloods. Like, that wasn't even a thing. Now, I'm looking at these videos, and these guys are throwing up Pyru, they're throwing up B's and C's, and they're just flamed up from head to toe. And they're like, they're in Long Island. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, it looks so crazy to me, because that's not what New York is known for. So it's like, these guys go over there, and is that how this movement essentially starts moving on over and crossing state lines?
Well, I think there's multiple ways that we see gang culture popping up in different places. I would say during the whole crack cocaine epidemic in the 1980s, a lot of LA gang members sought out different markets to sell their drugs because it was getting harder and harder in LA. The LAPD was getting smarter, and the sheriffs were getting smarter. So the first cities that we saw Crips and Bloods were like Portland, Seattle, Phoenix, Las Vegas, all these western cities, because that's where it was close. And Crips and Bloods in LA would say, "Hey, let's go to this other town. I got family in Portland."
It's easier to move up than across.
Yeah, but then eventually, some guys were moving as far as Minnesota. I remember when Freeway Ricky Ross was a drug kingpin in the 80s. He was distributing all the way to the Mississippi River from Los Angeles.
Jesus.
So a lot of the culture got spread that way.
Okay.
But some of it is just copycat.
Really?
Yeah, kids are in their own little rural or suburban town, and they want to start a gang, and they don't want to start something that doesn't have name recognition.
Yeah.
Right.
So they say, "Hey, let's start.
Let's attach ourselves to this.
Let's be the Rolling 60s Crips." And they have no connection to Los Angeles, never been to LA, don't know any real 60s Crips, but they created.
We're just in Alabama now.
Yeah. So I mean, I used to want to in the 90s. I used to want to research this because I remember I went to Fort Worth, Texas, for a conference, and every time I go to a city, the first thing I do is I go to the ghetto, right? So I went to the ghetto in Fort Worth, Texas, and I saw 107th Street, Grape Street Crip graffiti on the wall, right? So I was looking around, I'm like, this is not 107th Street here.
It's not Grape Street either.
And it's not Grape Street. So I took a bunch of pictures and I was fascinated. So I said, you know what? I'm going to track every single gang from LA in every single city because I didn't think it was that prevalent.
Yeah.
And then I started to do my research and I said, this is impossible.
Yeah.
It's Houston, Fort Worth, Tulsa, San Francisco, Oregon. There's no way to really track it all and figure out the history of how this gang popped up in this town. So I kind of gave up on that research.
That's a lot. And so most of it obviously is all centralized for you, right? In LA, South LA, most of the gangs.
Yeah, I try to just focus on LA because there's so much to learn, even though, it's one city. I've had some of my colleagues want me to compare my research with European researchers because Europe has a gang problem as well. And there's a bunch of researchers in Europe like me that do research in England and France, Spain. So I joined this organization called the Euro Gang Network, where we cross-collaborate and try to compare. We have an annual conference. I haven't really been as active in it, but I do want to compare what I find in LA to a European city to see if there's similarities, differences. And just preliminarily, I found that although it's not African Americans, Mexicans, and El Salvadorians that are in gangs in Europe, you find Pakistani youth, you find other immigrant groups in Europe that are part of the gang culture. So I believe that I'm going to find some similarities. It's just going to be different ethnic groups.
Right. Yeah, depending on what part of the world you're in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But definitely, like, I was in Amsterdam, I was in Spain, I was in England. There's a lot of immigration from the Middle East, and there's a lot of immigration from Africa. When I was in Amsterdam, I met so many people from South America, from a little country called a Dutch-speaking country in South America called Suriname. Suriname. It's on the northern part of South America. It's a very black country. And if you go to Amsterdam, you're going to meet a lot of Surinamese people because it's the common language. They speak Dutch. So, and a lot of the Surinamese people, they're in gangs in Amsterdam because they come from they're immigrants and they live in the poor communities and they come from impoverished areas.
Okay.
Interesting.
Now, one of the questions that we got was, what compels, someone to say, I'm going to join the 60s. I'm going to join.
More so, like, it seems that people that join gangs know that there's not really a bright future in it, right? It's not a long-term plan, usually. What would compel someone knowing, even in your interviews, a lot of people will say, I don't want to teach my kids this.
Yeah.
I don't want them anywhere near this. What compels them to stay in or even, like, start being in a gang? I mean, I understand that it has a lot to do with social economical issues and even just family initiations. It goes generations. But what are kind of the reasons you've seen that kind of just find links over and over throughout the different kind of gangs and stuff?
Well, you mentioned a lot of people say they don't want this for their kids or they don't want this for their family. Those are guys that have already been in it for like a decade, right?
Yeah.
The average kid that's joining is about 12, 13, 14 years old. So you got to put yourself in a young mind state, right?
Yeah.
And they don't see the consequences. They don't see the ramifications of joining the gang at 12 years old. And plus, there's a lot of pull factors that the gang has at work on some youth. And there's a lot of push factors that certain families kind of push kids into that lifestyle too. So it's a very complicated question to answer, and it's a little different for everyone, but usually young kids that are about 12, 13 years old that are joining a gang, they're trying to escape something else, most likely something in their home, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse. And this is a thing that in gang research we don't have a lot of data on, is because no one wants to talk about sexual abuse. From boys too. We hear about sexual abuse with girls all the time. Yeah. But we don't hear about sexual abuse to young 10-year-old boys who they just want to get out the house, and now they're 12, 13, and who do they see? Other kids that have commonalities with them, and those kids are the ones that are in the gangs.
I think that's something we talk about quite a bit in the Black and brown communities. Mental health treatment is something that's almost taboo.
We don't talk about it, right?
We don't talk about our
Latinos
feelings.
don't talk about it. Black people don't. We don't
pop a beer, roll a blunt or something.
Weed. We're not going.
You'll be all right. But I mean, we know from the outside now, or the more we go, mental health is so important, not only for us, but for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
And it just seems like even my parents, to think about going to see mental health, they see it as, oh, you're crazy. If that's the only reason you would go see someone, where there's many reasons why you would go see a mental health person, and I think that's something that has plagued us,
I agree wholeheartedly that mental health and also post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a significant issue that affects not just kids that are in the gangs, but kids that live within these gang communities as well, because they got to walk amongst this, they got to navigate through it, they may have to deal with some bullying. So those kids are exposed to far more conflict, far more violence, and it's just something that I think mainstream society just doesn't care about these issues going on in our community, because there's like a million other issues that we're dealing with. I mean, just imagine the homelessness issue right now. The homelessness issue is so complex because it's also intertwined with mental health. It's intertwined with PTSD. It's intertwined with economics, healthcare, job opportunities. So, but we don't ever really talk about gangs as this complex issue. Like I'm hearing a lot of stuff about homelessness now on the news. People are talking about it, and we just kind of forgot it. Whenever gangs comes up, it's something negative, right? It's like we got to arrest these dudes or they're animals, like Trump said the other day. But it's never like, hey, it's a mental health issue también. It's also PTSD. It's also economics. But, unfortunately, we're not at that point where most of mainstream society, most of the conservative base wants to have that conversation. But I think that we're at a point now where city government here in LA, they're starting to recognize that it's a bigger issue than just some kids on a corner being thugs. Because under Daryl Gates, the chief from 1977 to 92, he didn't care about any of these issues. Now we'll have a chief that at least says the right things, but they still don't care. So we're evolving. Now eventually we're going to get to a chief that says the right things and does the right things. So what does that take? Maybe 50, 60 years, counting from when Chief Parker, we got to go back to Chief Parker, 1950, he comes into office. And here we are 78 years later, and we've moved,
scratching the surface.
We've moved the dial a little bit,
So what do you think it would take, at least, speaking specifically about mental health? Because in all honesty, and I was talking to Vic, I feel that that's a huge driving factor for a lot of these kids, because you're exposed to so much, and me myself, doing some therapy and understanding that sometimes you do need to speak about these things, right? You need to be able to kind of go through the motions and understand what it is. And some of these kids don't know that, right? There's such a stigma behind it that, they get stuck in a rut. And the only way to even cope with that is, let me go smoke some weed, right? Or let me go, now shit, they're fucking taking lean and fucking drinking, heroin in a cup.
Promethazine,
yeah. And then they, so like, what is it going to take for us to even get there? Because even within the community itself, like, these people can say what they want, but I know in my family, you even talk about a therapist, it's like, you're fucking crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. You know what I mean? So how do we even get it within the community to kind of maybe even kind of shift that?
Well, the therapy that's needed and those conversations that are needed, that comes from the discipline of psychology. And we don't have a lot of gang research that comes out of the discipline of psychology. Very little. Most of our gang researchers come out of sociology, anthropology. I'm a human geographer / sociologist, or criminology, which is that's very pro-police. But we do need more research coming out of the psychiatric discipline from our colleagues in psychology, and also help strip the stigma of getting therapeutic assistance. And then also, here's another thing that I think that kind of plagues Black and brown communities is that we don't start to look at an issue of a particular youth until he's already in the criminal justice system. And by that time, it's kind of too late. So we have to find a way to have this conversation and interface with these youth before they get caught up in the criminal justice system. And that starts in the schools. Now, years ago, I used to do counseling at Culver City High School for gang members only.
Okay.
It was like a pilot program. I wasn't even getting paid to do this, but I thought it was so important. I would go there once a week, round up all the gang members, and we're going to sit in a room like this, and we're going to talk about our issues.
Yeah.
And it was every single gang member in this room said, man, you were amazing, Alex. This is so helpful. But they didn't want to fund it for it to continue.
Yeah.
But just imagine if you had a guy like me going to every high school that had gang issues and talking to all the gang members once a week across this entire city, the impact that would have on these kids before they even interface with the criminal justice system. In fact, one day I was in my office and I was getting a delivery from DHL, and I opened up the door and the guy gave me the thing, and it was one of the gang members that I counseled
Through the program.
and through the program at Culver City High School. And he was like, yo, Alex, he was like, man, I never forgot the things you said, even though I might not have listened. It stayed in my head, and I changed my life, you know? And it took me that was in 2006 when he came to my office. I used to do this program in 1998. So I didn't realize the impact it really had until years later I bump into this dude. And then I started doing more research and realized how important it is for therapy. And I'm not even a trained psychologist, but I understand gang talk.
Right.
And they don't want to fund that. They don't want to do that. But that would be so tremendous if the LA Unified and our school system did that, not only in the high schools, but I also believe middle school too.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, they're 12, 13. That's kind of when they're they're trying to join that.
Because those school counselors that are there, they're good for what they do, but they're not addressing some of these other issues that will help the kid cope in class, perform better in class. Yeah. They look forward to when I'm coming. If I wasn't able to make it a particular week, he's not going to come this week, you know. So I saw how important that was, and years later I realized the impact it had.
Well, I think one of the things that makes you successful, at least in the gang interviews and gang research you do, is the fact that you're not going there with a bias, right? You're going there to learn and to give the opportunity for them to speak. You know, what are the real happenings in their neighborhood? And I feel like the average person that's not in a gang, right, which is people in the hood and people in the suburbs, they live everywhere, right? I think that it's kind of a misconception that these people are a lost cause. And for someone like you to go into a neighborhood like this kind of speaks the opposite. That somebody does think it's worthwhile to understand what's going on. So do you ever get, I mean, I'm sure you get resistance in people wanting to talk for many reasons, incriminating reasons, just hesitation to put their face out there. But do you feel that the more interviews you get, the easier it is for people to open up to you about what they're doing? Also, one thing that I want to know, you're Puerto Rican, right?
Yes.
So an Afro Latino.
Yes.
Does that ever work against you, going to Mexican gangs, going to black gangs?
Never.
Never?
Never. It's a benefit for me.
You see, I knew it's one or the other, right? It was either going to be a hindrance or absolute.
A lot of my black friends say, it's not fair, Alex. You hang out with us like you're one of us, and then you're over there hanging out with them like you're one of them.
Yeah.
And, I'm blessed that, I'm from a little tiny island in the Caribbean that gets hit by massive hurricanes and destroys pretty much everything. But I love that place. Yeah. I mean, I was born in New York, but my whole family's from there. In fact, I was there for on and off for the last 6 months in the post-Hurricane Maria. But to answer your question, the more interviews I do, the more it is. It's easier for them to open up to me. When I first started doing this, it was very difficult. Yeah, but my goal is to humanize these guys, right? Because no one else is doing that. The media is not doing it. The police aren't doing it, and they're humans like everyone else that has struggles like everyone else. In fact, I would say their struggles might be even more severe, right, and more problematic than everyone else. And I want to give them an opportunity to tell their story and that's why I let them come on my platform and express themselves however they want. And that's why I'm able to just do so many interviews, because I'm not asking Tom Brokaw type questions.
Right.
How much dope did you sell this year? Do you have a gun on you right now? Why are you carrying a gun? How many people did you shoot? No, I'm not there for that. You know, I want to know, where'd you grow up? When did you join the gang? Why did you join the gang? How did you feel when you got in it? You know, who inspired you to be a part of it? You know, and through those questions, they really kind of open up and tell these stories, as you can see. And one of the things that I love is when I look through the comments, people will say, I actually like that guy. He seems cool. Because gang members never get that. You know, if you just watch the news, you're never going to end up saying, oh, I want to meet that guy that just did that drive-by shooting, you know?
Well, I think, like you said, the media vilifies these people when at the end of the day, they're just human. I mean, I know it, and I'm sure Vic knows it as well. It's just, they're just regular people. It's just where they live, where they grew up. At the end of the day, they're just like you and I.
And I think we over-stigmatize and over-criticize the crime they do. And even though they do some very violent crimes, from murders to drive-bys, America is involved in all kind of criminal activity, from our government to our politicians, white-collar, corporate crime. I mean, it's everywhere. But it's our black and browns that are doing the most time in our prisons for the crimes they do. And I think that's unfair. I think, hey, if we're going to punish them, let's punish everyone.
Right.
And if we're not going to punish everyone, let's give these guys another opportunity.
Fair shake.
And that's why I testify in a lot of cases, because I try to level the playing field.
See, that's what we're going to get into. That's where I was going to try to get into. But
I try to level the playing field in the criminal justice system, because if you was ever to sit in on a gang trial, it will blow your mind, all the stuff that the prosecution says and the police say about this one individual. Even the gang member is sitting there like, shocked.
I did that.
He's like, what? You know, that's not true. You know, so that's what the channel really. I mean, there's many goals of the channel, but one of them is really trying to humanize these people and letting them tell their story.
I think one thing I've caught from research of your channel is that you're not making excuses for the people that do things that are unexcusable. You
Correct.
know? So I think that I'm getting the message you're getting across, and I think it's very interesting. Now, when it comes to the media, because we were talking about this a little last night, you were talking about how misrepresented you can be. In the world of fake news, you could say, because that's a very hot buzzword. There's truth to it in the media. I mean, I hate to give that guy credit, but I give credit what is due. There is. He uses it the wrong way, but that's a whole nother story, you know. Why do you think they have such they have so much skin on this idea to vilify? Is it to keep people scared of black and brown people? Like I always wonder, because I mean, growing up, we've gone through things too. You know, I grew up in the suburbs of Pasadena. Even I have gone through police, things with the police that have felt like bullshit, you know? But why would the media, what role do they have? Why would they want to do that? And we know it happens.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question, because the media's narrative of not just gangs, but just about any social topic, social issue is completely inaccurate. But in terms of gangs, I think one of the things that's important is that you have to understand the media or the newspaper business or the magazine business is a business.
Right.
Yeah.
So their goal is to either sell magazines, I guess not as much today, or now it's about getting clicks and in advertising. And what we have learned over the last, 50 years of studying the media is that crime sells. Mm-hmm. And that's why if you ever watch the news at 11 o'clock, the first 6.5 to 7 minutes is all crime.
You know what? I've noticed it, but
Time
subconsciously.
It's so, you're so used to it that you don't even sit back and say, wow. It's like I'm critical of every single story. So I'm looking at it through a different lens. So when I watch the news, I'm actually timing this. Like, how long are they going to do crime? Is it going to be 6 minutes, 7 minutes, or 8 minutes tonight? And that's really creates the fear card. And then what they have to do is they have to balance that by, okay, now we got them. Now we caught them. Now they're arrested. And now it's black and browns in handcuffs being the perp walk. And it all goes down to a business. I think that's the biggest thing. And then back in the days, Stanley, what's this research? He came up with the idea called the moral panic. And the way gangs are articulated now follows this premise of the moral panic. The media tells you this gang did a shooting, this gang was involved in this crime, and now we as the viewer, we're concerned and we have a level of fear about it, and now we want that solved. We want that case to come to a conclusion, and that's why most of America's like, okay, let the police handle it. But also, the police is feeding the media a lot of the information. It's almost as if the media is an extension. It's like an unintended consequence where the media is an extension of the police. Because whenever you see a person, a newscaster in front of a crime scene, and they're saying, oh, they just arrested such and such, and this crime just happened, they're reading a press release typed up by who?
LAPD.
An LAPD spokesperson. So almost every single crime scene that you see on the news, in the media, on local news, they're giving you the words of the police, but it sounds as if it's coming from them.
Well, this sounds like the U.S. government playbook too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the media is supposed to be an independent, private business, and they're actually in cahoots. And I don't think it's deliberate. I just think they need to get the story out. There's pressure there's deadlines and there's pressure. And where's that press release? And they get it from the police and they just read it.
It's almost like, let's do what's easy.
Exactly. In fact, one researcher once called it's our media and our journalists are becoming lazy.
Yeah.
They're lazy.
No, I've heard that too.
So I would love to write up a press release and slide it to the journalists right there and say, hey, I'm at a crime scene. We don't know who did it. Yeah. We have no idea who's the suspect. There's no one that saw the suspect. We can't even say it's gang related. But here's the interesting thing. Most of the time, the journalists will say, there was a shooting right here. There were no witnesses. There's the victim's dead. The suspect's gone. But they believe it's gang related. So they have no evidence of really what happened.
Because it's in the hood, because a black or brown person is involved. Like that's the dots they connect.
Well, the police will say that. The police will say, like off camera, they'll say, "Yeah, we just came to the crime scene. We got a black victim here, and this is a gang area. Therefore, we think it's gang related." And then the journalist will irresponsibly repeat that. And then 6 months later, we might find out. Half the time, we find out it's not. And half it is. But they always just want to throw that out there because it gets clicks. It sells magazines. It sells newspapers.
The only problem I have with that is the inconsistency, because we've been seeing a lot of school shootings recently, and it seems that the white perpetrators that usually do this, right? That we've seen the trend happen over and over across the country. Young white male shoots up a school. They get the benefit of the doubt of he's an misunderstood young man that committed this crime.
Unbelievable.
They said this kid, this last kid in Texas,
he was
being
bomber.
bullied. I'm like, you know how many fucking kids have get bullied day in and day out, and it's almost you're trying to humanize this person to a degree, right? He's no longer this maniac who just killed 10 people and injured another 10. Now he was going through something as well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
And we don't get the benefit of the doubt.
That's white privilege right there at work through the media. And the media probably doesn't even realize what they're saying and what they're doing and the stories that they're putting out. Because if a black kid that shoots and kills one person, they're going to just lay him out.
Right.
He might even end up on death. We have people on death row for one homicide. For one homicide. In fact, I did a little meme. I guess you can call it a meme. And I have Jared Loeffner on one side, and I have Pedro Espinosa on the other side. And I said, murdered 12 people, sentenced to life under the white kid. Mm-hmm. And then under Pedro Espinosa, murdered once, sentenced to death. And that's basically what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that was an interesting thing that, I know we discussed a little bit yesterday, which was, they sensationalize these court cases, in this case Pedro Espinosa, and you yourself even said it, this is one of my highest clicked videos. Is this guy's getting sentenced to death.
And he didn't even say anything in the video, right?
Yeah,
it's just the court, it's just a trial.
It's the judge talking. It's mostly the judge talking, and he's reacting. He does have one reaction when they say, you have to pay $7,000 in restitution. And he looks over at his lawyer like, they're sentencing me to death and they want me to pay $7,000. But yeah, it's the it was one of the most viewed videos. The guy doesn't say, and it's an old video.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that I was doing my top 10 viewed videos of 2017, and a video from 4 years ago makes it in my top 10 for 2017. And I think it's because Trump has been using the father of that victim on the campaign trail to really get into this debate about immigration, because Pedro wasn't a U.S. citizen when that crime was committed.
And that's one of the things that I kind of also wanted to lead into, which is Trump's been dropping animals, and he's been dropping MS-13 so heavy, and he's obviously using it as a smoke screen for immigration reform to a degree.
And to get his wall built. Yeah.
So no one really even heard about MS-13. Unless you were from L.A. or you were Salvadoran, you really didn't know MS-13, or even if you were Honduran.
Unless you're watching Fox News for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. So he's been using that and that gang, right, to essentially, again, it's a smokescreen to get whatever he is that he wants to get built, immigration, get these guys out. And, I guess for me, it's trying to understand how is it that these people don't see, right? Like, where did MS-13 even come from? And I saw one of your interviews where you said that MS-13 was created by the government, right? It was literally by the war in El Salvador created a civil war, and from that you get these kids that get displaced, come move out here, and then become a gang. Is there truth to that?
Well, it started. One of the things that people don't understand about MS-13 is that it started in L.A. It didn't start in El Salvador.
Okay.
It started in L.A. and grew in L.A. Now, there are lots of satellite MS-13 gangs around the country, and there's a lot of them in Central America. Some of them are connected, some of them are not. What the government has done is labeled MS-13 the most violent gang in America by referring to violence that happened in Central America. I think the most popular one was the school bus massacre that happened like 10 years ago, where I think 20-something people were killed. Yeah. They say it was MS-13 members that did it, but these are guys that aren't from LA. They're not from the United States. They're not from America. But they will put that crime on the American side of MS-13, because now there's kind of two sides to MS-13, the U.S. ones and the ones in Central America. And they're completely different. There's completely different social conditions in these countries, in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, than there are in Long Island, New York, and Los Angeles, right? But there are like maybe 3 incidences that happened in the United States connected to quote-unquote MS-13 that they could go to in terms of violence. But I can go to dozens and dozens of other criminal acts by other gangs, black gangs, black American gangs, that the president will never even talk about. So it's very misleading to put so much conversation into MS-13 when really, in essence, they're not doing anything that's unusual than any other gang. So it's really it's a way for him to stir up his anti-immigration base and to get that support from Middle America that doesn't understand any of this stuff.
It's fear-mongering, obviously.
It's absolutely creating a moral panic. It is the quintessential moral panic that President Trump has created by characterizing MS-13 in this manner when there's really no evidence to even support it. I remember I was reading a government document by California Senator Dianne Feinstein. She wrote all of this stuff about gangs, and this is a Democrat, supposed to be a liberal politician, right?
She's corporate, though.
Yeah. She wrote this document about the gangs, and she mentioned 18th Street and MS-13, and she says something about how majority of this gang are quote-unquote illegal aliens, right? I know that that's not true. The U.S. gang members, a majority of them are born here. Yeah. But she had it cited. everything that she had was cited. So I went to the citation. I was like, I want to know where Dianne Feinstein is getting this. So I went to that citation. I looked in the bibliography, pulled that one out. I read it, and the quote was somewhere in there, and that was cited. So I kept on following the citation to find out where did this statistic come from, and I ended at a dead end.
Wow.
It was untrue. So basically, you can take Dianne Feinstein's report on gangs and throw it in the basura because it was all BS. And that's one of the things I do as a researcher. You want to know, where did this citation come from? You just keep following the citations. And I started to realize I can't even trust these government publications.
Right. Yeah.
It's all lies.
Man. I know we had a conversation, a little small conversation, and it had to do with the system, the judiciary system and these jails. And, we have so many of these cases, right, where these kids are getting put on trial and they just want to cop out the plea, and then, instead of actually going to trial. You kind of touched on it a little while ago where, that's where you kind of come in and you implement yourself to kind of just say, listen, what the prosecution is putting out, a lot of it is bullshit, and a lot of it is trying to vilify this person to give him max years. And, and in doing this, and you said you've done this over, 10 years, 20 years almost now?
Yeah, something more than 15, 16 years.
So is there any credence to the system trapping black and brown youths to actually keeping them in there, and the jail system actually being a for-profit business, essentially, and trying to keep these kids in here and hitting them with bullshit cases to keep them locked in as long as possible?
Well, I can say the first part of your question, are they keeping them in there and trapping them in there? I would say absolutely true. That it's as soon as a defendant comes across the criminal justice system here in L.A. County, or pretty much any county, but in L.A. County where I do most of my work, immediately the prosecution wants to figure out what's the maximum amount of years I can send this person to prison. That's the agenda. What is the max? Because this is what they do. That's how they get. What they do is they get the maximum years, and then at their cocktail parties, they brag about how many years did your guy get sent to prison for. Oh, I got mine sent for 85 years. So these prosecutors brag about how many years they were able to send their defendants to prison for. But at the same time, this is how they get promoted. Every prosecutor's thinking, I'm going to be the DA. Just like every college player thinks he's going to the NBA, right. Every prosecutor thinks he or she's going to become the district attorney.
Well, that's how they prove that they're hard on crime. Because I'm familiar with a personal friend that got into big trouble with the DA of Pasadena, and it had to do with a weed case. And they did everything they could to make sure this guy, and it wasn't even, a person of color, but they did everything they could, including total weight of plants, to give him as many years as he could. So he had a couple plants, and they took the entire weight of the entire plant, not the usable flower, and the problem was, we figured out that there was an election coming up the following year for the DA of Pasadena.
Yeah.
And she wanted to make sure she was tough on crime, tough on drugs. Because at that time, Pasadena had a no medical dispensary rule. So they were trying to be tough on weed. And that's what a lot of this is. A lot of it is, I'm going to get elected, or I'm trying to move up. And I don't care about these people that are probably not even going to vote, or not even vote for me, or not vote at all. I'm gonna make sure that the middle class white mom that's driving her van is gonna vote for me in the next election, and that's a big problem.
So you got to witness this. Most people don't get to witness this, but I would say every gang trial is politicized in the same way that weed case was politicized. Jamil Shaw, Pedro Espinosa case was extremely politicized. But every little gang case that gets tried in Los Angeles County is politicized to a certain degree, because it's all about winning the case for the prosecution and maximizing that sentence. That's really all it's about. And that's why I love to work on these cases, because I see that this playing field is not level at all.
Right.
And even though a lot of these guys have public defenders,
which are bullshit.
Well, I would say that the public defenders have improved in the last decade, because now the public defenders, they have choices that they have to make to benefit their career as well. So, which is great if you need a defense attorney, because now our county and our state are appointing judges from the defense side as well. It used to be that only prosecutors became judges. Okay. Now defense attorneys are becoming judges. And how do they become judges? They've shown a great record of defending their clients as rigorously as possible. So now every public defender wants to win. Yeah. They really want to win, and that's why they call people like me, and they have the ability to call all kind of experts. Like, for example, in a regular gang case, in a regular murder, you might have cell phone evidence that's pinging towers. You might have fingerprints on a weapon. You might have DNA, and then you have gang stuff. You can call an expert for all of those areas, and the defendant has that right, and the county will pay for it. The state will pay for it, and the public defender will hire the cell phone expert to challenge that evidence. We'll hire a DNA expert to make sure that there's no funny business, and we'll hire a gang expert. So I would say that the public defenders in the past were public pretenders, no doubt about it. But I think that they're doing a better job, a far better job now. And here's another interesting part of the defense aspect of it is that you have the public defender's office. And then you also have another office called the alternate public defender. And you can get a lawyer from the alternate public defender's office when there's a conflict that exists within the public defender's office. But then there's a third area where you can get an attorney all for free, and it's called bar panel. And the bar panel are private attorneys that basically are paid by the county, but they're paid by the same people that the public defenders are. So you have three sources of attorneys now that are working on the trials in LA. So if you can't get a good public defender, you might get a good alternate public defender, or you might get a good attorney that's on the bar panel. The bar panel attorneys are probably the best because they have the most experience as being private. Okay.
Gotcha.
But I would say that I've seen some amazing public defenders. I've worked with several of them. We've got acquittals, we've got hung juries. So I'm a believer now that a lot of these public defenders are really trying to work as hard as they can for their clients.
And that's great because I know in years past you got a public defender and you're like, shit, you might just want to plea.
But I can only speak for Los Angeles County. This public defender issue that you just mentioned, I'm sure in other counties and other states, it's terrible. I know some guys that are on a case in Louisiana. They've been in custody since 2014, Lord, and they don't even have they haven't been appointed a lawyer yet.
Damn. Jesus.
So I don't want people to get misunderstood what I'm saying about the public defenders are doing a great job. It's only Los Angeles County. And
doing better.
They're doing getting there.
Well, I mean, when you get an acquittal in this county, that's amazing.
Yeah.
When you can get a hung jury in this county, that's amazing. Especially a gang member. I had a case where a gang member got caught with the gun, fingerprints on it. A girl made a statement saying he did it, and we got an acquittal on that. That's hard public defending work, But I don't think Orange County, Ventura County, San Diego, counties in Nevada, Arizona, the public defender system in America is all screwed up. But at least Los Angeles has the resources now to give defendants the tools to defend themselves.
Yeah, and it's a great thing that you're actually a part of that as well and trying to infuse yourself in that because there isn't a lot of help. You know what I mean? If you're poor and disenfranchised, if you're Latino, if you're black, and you get popped for something, whether right or wrong, and we've seen instances where, it wasn't me, you just picking somebody to say that he fit the description, that's who it is. You have no help.
That's real.
So what's it going to be? It's going to be, do you want to face 50, 60 years or you just want to cop out to this 5 year, 6 year, whatever it may be? And you don't know any better. You don't have any help. There's nothing out there for you. You just say, fuck it, I'm just going to cop the plea because 50, 60 years don't sound good to me.
Yeah, that's another real, I guess, terrible part of our justice system is the amount of people that plead that are innocent.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting in the county jail. I think the county jail is actually designed to make you plead because it's the worst prison to be in all of America. You'd rather be sitting in Pelican Bay than sitting in the Los Angeles County Jail. And everyone in the county jail, they just can't wait to get to prison.
Give me the federal.
Or state prison.
Yeah.
Because the conditions in the LA County Jail are just absolutely horrendous. So you're sitting in there for 6 months. And then you're sitting in there for a year. Then they give you this deal, and you don't like it. But then they give you another deal, and now it's 2 years, and you're just like, whatever. Whatever the next deal is, I'm taking it. And that's really what a lot of people do. And I've had clients where I'm like, hey, I'm ready to go to trial. And they're like, I'm just going to take the deal, Alex. I'm like, dude, we can fight this.
Yeah.
Nah, because if I fight it and lose, I'm going to get 20. They just offered me 10. Let me just take this 10. And I'm like, but they
already did 2. Let me.
Yeah, they already got some credits. But I'm like, this case is completely weak. But at the end of the day, I'm not doing their time.
Right.
And it's the decision that they're going to make. And I've been so pissed at least like 10 times where I was gearing up for trial. I went out there and did my research. I went to the crime scene. I gathered up evidence. I did interviews. We're ready. Oh, Alex, I'm taking a plea tomorrow.
Oh man.
For how much? I'm gonna take 8 years. 8 years, and you that's their decision.
Yeah.
That's their decision. Because
I mean,
at the end of the day,
it's their time.
I'm not doing their time.
And I mean, you start figuring out. I'm a black man. I'm a Hispanic man in LA County in the United States. This seems weak, but I've seen cases where, damn,
you know, a case
5 years. Here you go.
Look, you know, a case is weak when you first get arrested, and it says all your charges and your maximum exposure is 75 years, but they give you an offer for 8.
Yeah, right, like that. It's wild.
Yeah, you know that's a weak case.
You could cop a couple 20, 40 years, but you could cop out right now for 6.
Actually, I knew this defendant. I didn't work on this case. I do a lot of trial watching too. The case of the State versus Aubrey Berry. He was charged with murder. He shot and killed the kid at the Beverly Center back in like 2009, and he got arrested at the airport. He's not even from LA. He's from Georgia. And the prosecutor, Bobby Grace, offered him 8 years for murder. Now, murder is 25 years, plus the gun enhancements, another 25 years. That's 50 years. And the dude said, nah, I'm not taking the deal. I'm going to trial because he felt it was self-defense. Yeah. And he took it to trial and was acquitted.
Wow.
Was acquitted. And even his lawyer told him, I think you might want to take this 8 years or 9 years, whatever they were offering. Even his own lawyer said it. But he's like, I'm not doing any years. I didn't do anything wrong. I just protected myself. And he went up, he testified, he presented himself, and I was amazed at his testimony. I even knew it. I said, this guy's getting acquitted. The family was mad at me. The family of the victim, the guy that was killed, they were mad at me. But jury came back, not guilty. I had a camera in that courtroom, and the video was online, and you see the dude, like, just the reaction.
The relief.
To look at someone's face.
This is done.
That is facing pretty much life. Is acquitted. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing. Like I said, I think just doing that for the community, man, because there isn't much out there. You know, I mean, I think now, I know we were talking about this woke era, right? That's kind of, and I think woke is just, you know, some people still sleep, but they're quote unquote, they're woke on Twitter, but not in real life. So I think, you know, that in itself, man, it's an amazing thing. And just being able to talk to you, you know, giving us some insight and the things that you do for the community, man. I know it inspires me. I'm sure it inspires Vic.
Definitely.
Just to, you know, we have to get out there because the government isn't going to do it for us.
No, they're not. In fact, if you caught a case, that tattoo on your left forearm, they would call that a gang tattoo.
Yeah, and this one too.
And they would try to use that against you in court.
Yeah, no, trust me. Pasadena police, they themselves, even though it's a small, and I know you're familiar with it because I saw one of the interviews you did with with a Pasadena Blood. You know, the northwest side of Pasadena,
like Fair Oaks.
Yeah, Raymond and all that. You know, and so I'm very familiar with the Pasadena Police Department, and you know the multiple times that they've pulled me over and you know, write this up, chop me up, let me take your fingerprint on the spot real quick just to make sure, you know. So you know I'm well with it, but I think just in general, you know, no one's gonna get us out of this except for us, and it's a great thing that we have so many people now, at the very least, on that level of we need to start doing this. We need to start taking a look at the judicial system, right? Our own socioeconomic issues, and you know, banking with Latinos, you know, to bring our own, bring ourselves up. So that's an amazing thing, Alex, man, and it's really, really dope.
Thanks for those kind words. I really appreciate it.
One of the things I would kick myself in the butt to not ask if we didn't get it. We're running low on time, but I have to ask. We're a part of our show largely revolves around music. And growing up in the era we grew up, two of the biggest rappers of all time shot and killed. L.A. and Las Vegas.
Within 6 months.
So who did it?
Who was it? Was it Keefy D? What
kind of info do you got?
If you don't want to say nothing, listen, just blink.
Well, look,
blink your left eye.
Look, Keefy D gave a statement. Everyone's heard that statement, right? And in that statement, he puts the gun in the hand of someone in the back seat. I partially agree with Keefy D.
Okay.
But I think he put the gun in the hand of the other guy in the back seat. And the reason why I say that is because I believe, and someone could fact check me on this, the other guy in the back seat was alive at the time. He has since deceased, so I don't have a problem saying that. So the other guy in the back seat, and I'm sure your listeners could do their research, I think he was the trigger person who was sitting right next to Orlando Anderson, who everybody else thinks was the trigger person. Of course, because Keefy D says he gave the gun to Orlando Anderson. So I think that's an easier one to solve. Everyone in that car is dead except for Keefy D. The driver might still be alive. Sorry, driver, if you're still living. But the Biggie one, I think I know who killed Biggie too.
Was it David Mack?
All I'll say is that David Mack robbed $700,000 from the B of A on Jefferson and McClintock. Did his time in prison. Money never found.
Got his $90,000 a year just to chill.
Yeah. And the thing is, was it worth it? You know you're going to get caught for that. Is it worth going 10, 12 years for $700,000? The only way it's worth it is if he took that $700,000 and invested it where it was getting a 10 to 12% return every year. Then he comes out to like 1.1 million. But I don't want to go into the Biggie one so much. But I will tell you this. I will tell you a funny story. There's a guy that was involved in the Tupac shoot. They say he brought the gun and gave the gun to Keefy D. A guy named, do you guys remember the guy's name that gave the gun to Keefy D? Keefy D says his name. Oh, man, it's just slipping my head. He died recently. Drug dealer from New York. Spent a lot of time in L.A.
The dude, the guy who had the barbershop had all this. What is his name?
Big time drug dealer.
Haitian Jack?
No, not Haitian Jack. I'm so sorry. I can't remember his name, but it'll come. I got into an argument with the same guy one day in Hollywood. And we were arguing back and forth, but he was a little older than me, so I knew it wasn't going to be a fight. Yeah. You know, I was, I think, like 30 at the time, and this dude was like in his 40s. I knew it wasn't going to be a fight, but he was telling everybody there, you better tell this guy who I am, right? And I'm there like, I don't care who you are. Yeah. You know, this is whatever it was. We were arguing, and I thought it was going to be a fight, but it never was. And he kept on pointing his finger, and the dudes that were with me knew who he was, and they were telling me, Alex, chill. You don't know who this dude is. And I was like, I don't care who this dude is, you know. And it turned out that's the dude who gave the gun to Keefy D that eventually killed Tupac. Wow. I had a face-to-face argument with this guy, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name.
It's all good. Maybe it's for the best.
Well, he recently passed of some illness, so
okay.
He's no longer with us.
All right. Well, Alex, man, hey, I truly, honestly, really appreciate you giving us the time, man. This was an amazing experience. And, man, streetgangs.com. How many views over the
99 million?
99
I was thinking of having a party when I hit 100 million, but we'll see.
We invited?
Everyone's invited. Everyone. I got to find a venue.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, we will appreciate it, man.
Anything else you want to plug?
Nah, I just appreciate you guys doing it. I mean, everything. I'm easy to find. Alex Alonso 101 on every social media platform, or just go visit streetgangs.com. Okay. And all the links are there.
Awesome. Well, sir, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, guys. All right.
We're out.